Hello, my name is Belinda Danquah, and this is a short presentation on individual policy analysis with a focus on international illicit drug trade. So this is an overview of my presentation. I'll briefly talk about the history on international illicit drug trade, background on heroin abuse, heroin market trend, factors that have promoted the global expansion of international illicit drug trade, and finally, the global drugs prohibition regime assessment. Now, in defining international illicit drug trade, it encompasses the manufacturing, dissemination, and trading of substances that are monitored by international law enforcement policies. Now, illicit drugs are those for which non-medical use is prohibited by the national or international laws. And below are some of the categories of illicit drugs. We have opioids, which is made up of heroin, morphine, cocaine, and some others. Currently, the global drug trafficking trade value is estimated between $304 billion. And because of the lucrative nature of this drug trade, some of the dealers and those who traffic it are able to make a lot of money from it, and they're able to ultimately finance sector infiltration by putting in whooping sums of money into this business. Now, there's also the law enforcement corruption, where these corporates are able to pay their way through the police and other security agencies for them to be able to traffic these drugs across borders and move them from one country to the other. And lastly, there's the enrichment of organized criminal groups, where they are being supplied with machineries and guns to protect and fight themselves. And this also further expands the business. Now, looking at this, the United Nations 2020 drug report shows that 35.6 million people worldwide suffered from drug use disorders in 2018. And this further shows that 7,620 tons of illicit opium were produced and 1,723 tons of cocaine were produced in 2018 globally. Hence, we can say that the production of opium is much higher than that of cocaine, and this is where the focus of our presentation will be. Moving on globally, more than 15 million people consume illicit opiates, and it is mostly consumed in terms of medical treatment and drug-related violence. The most consumed opiates is heroin, and people smoke, inject, sniff, or snort it. So we can see that opium actually causes acute and chronic diseases, including HIV/AIDS and hepatitis B. For instance, in Central Asia, Ukraine and the Russian Federation, opiates are linked to nearly 60 to 70% of all HIV infections. Beyond the health impacts, the illicit opiates industry has detrimental effects on stability and security. The global consumption of heroin is currently at 340 tons and is largely restricted to two main areas, that is the Golden Crescent and the Golden Triangle. Now, the main focus is the Golden Crescent, where we have Afghanistan taking 90% of opium production, as seen on the pie chart, and the rest, the 10%, are produced in Southeast Asia and Latin America. Now, this is a graph from the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. This is showing us the drugs, the production of heroin as at 1990 to 2017. And we can tell from the drug a significant decrease in 2001, which was attributed to the seizure of these drugs by law enforcement agencies. And after that, we can tell that from 2001 going, there was an upsurge we can tell that there was a much increase in 2017, where we had 300,000 of hectares of heroin. This is a world map showing the major trafficking routes and growing areas of opiates and cocaine. From the map, we can tell that this is the area of Afghanistan, and they produce largely the heroin to USA and other parts of the world. Now, this is showing Colombia as well. They were the highest producers of cocaine. And this is the region they can be found. And they also produce cocaine to other parts of the world. The heroin market trend. Now, drug is still used legally in the UK, Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland. And global heroin users are about 12 million people, majority of them being illegal users. The opiates and heroin markets comprises of three groups. Few opium-producing countries are seen, few trafficking countries, and the majority share of countries that consume opiates. Now, this slide is showing the opiate epidemic by the numbers. We can tell that in 2019, 70,630 people died from drug overdose and 50,000 people used heroin for the first time. Factors promoting the global expansion of the trade. Now, what is promoting this expansion? Because of the high profitability of this drug trade, it is lucrative. And besides it being lucrative, people do not care about the risk factors. They rather focus on it being lucrative and luring more people into the business. Now, as of 2014, the international illegal drug trade had estimated global GDP of 76 trillion US dollars, and the global market size that generated between US 426 and 650 billion dollars. Now, again, the cheap production of the trade also is a factor of the high profitability. We can talk about heroin being outsourced from Afghanistan and Pakistan, and they are bought at $2,600 per kilo and retail to the US at $13,000 per kilo. Now, the cheap production process, we can talk about the big cartels in Arellano, in Mexico, and then the Felix brothers in Colombia as well. So ideally, we can say that the closer one is to the source of the products, the cheaper it is to procure it. Now, we can tell that the world's most grown crops are cannabis, ranging from the highest, followed by cocaine, and then opium. Another reason for the expansion is the high demand and supply of the drug. Now, the demand has been complemented by the golden triangle of Southeast Asia, where we see Afghanistan still at the top. And then another is the addictiveness of the drug, which is encouraging more usage. Another extreme factor is corruption, where we have corrupt government officials, attractiveness of money in drug trade, the legitimization of public regimes, and deterioration of public institutions. Now, the main focus, global drug prohibition regime assessment. Now, over the years, there's been three main drug prohibition treaties. We have the Single Convention of 1961, which was made up of organic products, cannabis, cocaine, and opium. And this same convention was later amended in 1972 as a single convention. The next one is the 1971 UN Convention of Psychotropic Substances, which includes opiums, amphetamines, sedators, and hypnotics. The last one, 1988 UN Convention against illicit traffic in narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances, which was to ban or chemical substances. Now, distinctively, there were other prohibition treaties, and this came about as of the result of the upsurge in heroin, and these were the Shanghai Opium Commission in 1901 and the Hague Opium Convention in 1912. Now, why did these two treaties come about? We can talk about two specific developments. That was a state-administered opium retail system in US, taking control of the Philippines, and the opium addiction in China that threatened the existence of the empire. Has global drug prohibition failed or not? We want to see whether it has failed or not. Despite all of these treaties, the big question is, has global drugs prohibition failed or not? The drug prohibition regimes appears to have not achieved its goals and objectives for numerous reasons. And currently, the war on drugs on international treaties do not respect the human rights of drug users, because these drug culprits are imprisoned, they are subjected to cruel treatments, and all these conflicts with the treaties of human rights of the UN. Now, that notwithstanding, it has been able to reduce drug use dependence or drug-related violences, which is evidenced by one, increased production of the illicit drug in Afghanistan. Now, talking about Afghanistan, we talked about, we know that there's 90% of heroin is being grown. And even though Afghanistan is a signatory of this treaty, it still hasn't been able to reduce the use of heroin because its GDP is highly dependent on heroin, and the local people also consume it. The next point is the increased consumption of the illicit drug trade. Now, USA is really consuming this drug, and we can attribute it to the factors such as modernization, industrialization, and globalization. And finally, the increasing contribution that illicit drugs have made to the global disease burden. Now, what can we do? How can we recommend, what are the recommendations for the drug prohibition regime? Currently, the treaties of the UN war on drugs is conflicting treaties of human rights, and it is recommended that the various drug treaties should be enforced in accordance with the human rights conventions, which can be achieved by decriminalizing possession and personal use of illicit drugs and diverting drug users to treatment. And the last one, which is decriminalizing possession and personal use of illicit drugs and diverting drug users to treatment. And this can be done by health and public interventions, which include distribution of the opioid antagonist naloxone to reduce overdose death, and actually medically supervising injection treatment to street drug users. Now, so the last one that can be done to decriminalize the possession is promote needle and syringe programs to reduce blood-borne viruses. Now, in conclusion, we know that the UN's insistence on the policy goal of a drug-free has made it easy for critics to argue that the international system has failed. And it is plausible that prohibition has deterred young people from using illicit drugs, that a drug-free world is unrealistic, an unrealistic policy goal for drug policy. Thus, in conclusion, the decriminalization of drug use needs to be considered as a core element in any public health strategy. Thank you very much.